Hi, everyone, and welcome to this Lathrop GPM webinar called Harnessing the Power of AI for Franchisors. My name is Ryan Palmer. I'm a partner in the franchise and distribution group at the firm, and it's my pleasure today to introduce my colleagues Tedrick Hausch and Dale Wirtz, who are going to take us on a tour of AI and help us understand how franchisors can use it in their business and how to manage the risks associated with this new technology. Tedrick and Dale both focus their practices on technology and data issues. Tedrick leads the firm's data privacy and security team, and Dale brings a wealth of knowledge on virtual property to our discussion from his work on technology and on technology transfer and commercialization transactions. I think you will find, as I have, that we are in very good hands for the next 60 minutes. Before I turn it over to Dale and to Tedrick, a couple of housekeeping items. First, if you have questions, use the chat feature and we'll get to as many of those as we can during the presentation. If we miss you or we run out of time, one of us will follow up with an email. We are recording the webinar today. We'll send you a link by Friday when that recording is available on our website. We'll also send you a copy of the slides so you can look back on this, and you're free to share those slides and the recording with other people in your organizations once we have those available. And if you're a lawyer looking for CLE credit, you're in luck. You have some free credit in Minnesota and Missouri. Those applications are pending. And as soon as we have the course codes, we'll get that information out to you as well. So with that, I will turn it over to Tedrick and Dale. Hi, guys. Take it away.
Hello. I'm glad you could join us today. We're going to talk about artificial intelligence. And like a lot of things that we've all learned in life, artificial intelligence is kind of as good as what you make of it. It's based on, as we'll discuss, the aggregation of data that is then analyzed by machines. Of course, if that data is not good in some way, there are lots of ways it could not be optimal, then the answers you may get won't be so good. So garbage in, garbage out. But having said that, Alan Turing asked the question, can machines think? And they're learning how to think. Next slide.
And this is another picture of Turing. If you didn't notice on the last slide, I had to slip in a picture of Benedict Cumberbatch, who played Alan Turing in a movie recently. But what we're talking about is machines that learn from experience. And as we talk a little bit about today, we aren't going to get too far under the hood with respect to how AI works. But to understand how it is that computers are seeking to harness this data and how the process of, it's really the processing of the data by the computers can be a number of different ways, but trying to make it like the human brain is really what is the goal, and we get closer to it every minute that all of these processes are going forward.
Okay, for our roadmap, what we're going to discuss today, we're going to launch into a discussion about data ownership and data flows. Then we're going to get into a little bit of a primer on what is AI, just so we're all on the same page. And as part of that, we'll do a little bit of looking at where you can get an AI tool, which could be useful. We'll get into some case studies, both general topics, but also specific things that different businesses have done with AI. And then we'll close with some practical and legal pitfalls that are unique to AI that you should keep in mind.
So the reason that we started with data ownership and data flows is because, first of all, it's the fuel that drives artificial intelligence. It has to operate on large sets of data. That's how it gets smarter, and that's how it learns how to learn. That's how that works. But for a franchisor, all of you, I'm sure, are finding that data is, in a way, the lifeblood of your organization. And I'm finding that most businesses, no matter what they do, if they're an excavating company, they're also a data company. So knowing the data that surrounds your customers and your revenues, and then analyzing it, is all based on your ability to harness that data. So one of the things as a franchisor, as you have relationship with franchisees, is who owns that data? In other words, there are a number of different concepts, but in the US, we tend to think of ownership of data, and then we give it to people to maintain or process it for us. In Europe and in other countries, they think of it less as ownership and more like a controller of data versus someone who processes that data for someone. And if you think about it, the part of that that doesn't quite fit in the equation or the Venn diagram, you have the owner, you have the maintainer, but then the data subject itself has certain rights provided by statute and otherwise. So when you think about the data and your rights to it, think of it as a bundle of sticks, and what are the sticks that are your rights as the franchisor. So the sort of seminal place to look for this is the franchise agreement. And how does your franchise agreement define customer data? So if you look at most privacy policies or privacy statements on websites, they're going to define personal information or personal data as basically a name associated with something else that can identify you. And it could be, in the short term, an IP address, but usually it's someone's email address, mobile number, but then it can get much more complex in terms of the relationships and correlations. So buying habits, the demographics of the individual and how they're involved. And if you think about it from a franchise perspective, who's collecting that data? It's probably interactions with your franchisee, but if you as the franchisor run the websites and are the recipient of that data at the first part, there's some way that that data gets put someplace and has to be shared with the other party. So given that it's a partnership of sorts with the franchisees, that needs to be spelled out as best you can in the relationship. And you have to think practically about where is it? Where is it actually physically located? And I know we think of the cloud as an ethereal place, but it's really just tens of thousands of servers that are located in certain places. And so you have to think about where that data is stored, who has access to it, and whether backups or copies exist. And I will take a moment putting on my data security hat to say that what backups you have is very important in these days of ransomware, because ransomware, if you've ever had that screen come up, and I assume a number of you have, where you have to pay Bitcoin in order to get your data back and your ability to use it, that can grind things to a halt and put a real fear and panic into your heart. The key to avoiding ransomware emergencies and crises is to have your data in a gapped backup location. In other words, someplace where if they get into your system, they aren't going to get to your backups. But coming back from my digression, a lot of times this data needs to be worked on, processed, or operated on by software programs that you and or the franchisees employ. So again, depending on your franchise relationship and your franchise agreement, when the franchisees receive that data, they may be doing something with it and putting it in an Excel spreadsheet or something else. And you should, through the relationship and the agreement, know what that is. So another aspect of understanding data ownership and data flows is what rights do you have to that data? So you know where it is, you found where it is, you have it spelled out in the franchise agreement. But when you claim that right, you say, we own all rights, and the franchisees have to get a license from us or have to ask permission and can't do anything without it. Or if you have a more loosely sort of confederation of franchisees, you may want them to go ahead and have the data and have the rights and be entrepreneurial with those. But what happens upon termination may drive how you approach data ownership. In other words, if you have a franchisee who leaves and that franchisee has all of the data about the customers who have visited that franchisee or worked with that franchisee, that's data that you've now lost that they can take to a competitor and share that with them and include it in their database. So in order to enforce your rights to be able to keep them from doing that, you're going to want to define it properly and have those rights set forth in the franchise agreement. And then I mentioned earlier that a lot of this data is probably held in third-party programs. So let's take Salesforce as a CRM, for example. If there's a termination, and I've had this situation come up in a lawsuit before, where a group of individuals left. It wasn't a franchisor franchisee arrangement, but it was a group of employees who left, and they were mortgage loan officers, and they were using a particular piece of software. And about halfway through the business year, the mortgage loan company had said to them, from now on, you have to pay for the software yourself. And that the people were griping about it, they were upset about it, but what happened when they left in the litigation, because I represented the individuals and the company that they went to, those that had bought and paid for the third-party software they were using got to use it. They got access to all of that customer data, as opposed to the ones who had used the company-bought software. They were cut off and didn't have rights. So think about those things as you go forward, because again, data sort of drives the answer to a lot of the questions that arise in the event of a termination of the relationship. Dale?
Okay. So let's talk a little bit about what is artificial intelligence. As you might imagine, if you just look at this list of different definitions from different sources, there are a lot of people that don't really agree on what artificial intelligence is. In fact, some people say that artificial intelligence is anything that humans can't do. And in some sense, once a software technique or tool is developed by a human that can do it, then it's no longer AI, which is kind of funny. So in that sense, if a machine can do it, it's not AI anymore. I don't necessarily agree with that. I think that's kind of tongue in cheek, but a few of the concepts I'd like to address are things like the capacity of a machine to simulate human intelligence. But even that's not quite right. Simulating human intelligence through machines gives us the benefit of speed. Computers, big computers in particular, can generate a lot of data and analyze it much faster than humans can. However, machines also look at things differently. AI algorithms, and we'll talk about algorithms in a second, but they learn differently than humans. So they can see relationships and patterns that humans may not be able to see. So I would say the two big advantages of AI in the abstract sense are the speed at which we can learn relationships and patterns and other insights that we otherwise would not be able to do as humans. So AI is a set of data-driven technologies that is automated. It uses machines to perceive their environment and respond in ways that maximize what we're trying to accomplish. So the term itself was first used about 70 years ago or 65 years ago. And as you might imagine, in the early years, there was a lot of kind of science fiction concept behind it. In fact, AI was often depicted in science fiction movies that we all grew up with. So I would say that there's really two categories of AI that we should think about. One is what we call narrow AI or weak AI, and that's really what we do in the world today. It focuses on doing a particular task extremely well. It just rinses and repeats until it gets it right. Some examples of that are like Google searches, image recognition software, Siri, Alexa, and other personal assistants, driving cars, IBM's Watson, machine learning and deep learning. We'll talk about machine learning and deep learning in a second. The other category or bucket is what we would call strong AI, or the artificial general intelligence. And that's kind of like a robot that can figure everything out on their own and they don't need any instruction and that sort of thing. That doesn't really exist today, although on the spectrum from Pong to general AI, where we have computers that can do everything, as time goes by, we're inching down that line toward what used to be to science fiction. So that's kind of exciting, and we'll see where it goes from there. So let's talk about some of these terms. Algorithms, everyone has heard that term. Just so everyone understands, it's basically a set of instructions to tell a computer what to do. Each algorithm has an input and an output. And the inputs we'll talk about in a little bit and the problems there. And that's what I talked about, the garbage in, garbage out. If you have a bad input, the algorithm is going to give you a bad result. Computer vision, that's parsing pixels and inferring a depicted object that are represented by clusters of colors. So that helps computers analyze and process and visualize the real world. Deep learning is a type of machine learning that runs inputs through a biologically inspired neural network. Sorry for the big terms here. But they're basically hidden, they allow the machine to go really deep in its learning and make connections that weren't necessarily written into its code, even beyond what machine learning can do. I would picture, if you can picture a bullseye, AI is like the big circle, and then the next smaller circle is machine learning, and then inside of that is the deep learning. And deep learning is a way that we achieve machine learning, and machine learning is a way that we achieve artificial intelligence. So generative adversarial networks, that's pitting one neural network against another. And the bad news about that is that's what gives rise to things we call deep fakes. And in this political season, you'll probably see more and more of those. I know we saw them in the last election cycle. Really hyper-realistic AI-generated images and videos where it's very difficult for the human eye to know what's real and what's not. It has some ominous applicability to franchisors' business because at some point in the future, I'm not aware of any situations yet, but advertising may be difficult. It may look like a real situation when it's really not. And it's one thing to depict your own business using a deepfake technology, but if you start depicting your competitors' businesses that way, the consumers out in the marketplace could misread what's really going on. And for instance, in today's, to get back to kind of a political example, if your franchisor company was depicted as being for or against a particular social justice position, then whether it's true or not, if it looks realistic, a lot of people may believe it. It may create some public relations problems for you.
And so, I'll jump in just a minute, Dale, on the generative adversarial networks. It is sort of a red team, blue team. The goal of those networks is to fool the AI that you have working on things. And it's one of these societal things. We've clearly adapted to a world where social media drives a lot of our interactions, particularly when we're all stuck at home. But I think what comes with that is our human ability to try to discern between deep fakes and these other things we're going to see, which means the future consumer and the future recipient of advertising is going to have a different set of skills of discernment and perhaps a different level of cynicism and questioning about the things that are posed to it. So you'll find that as we look at some of the case studies that we see, companies realize that at the end of the day, you still have to have that human part of the interaction. It has to ring authentic, and it has to ring true, or it's not going to communicate your message.
Okay. Two other topics I want to mention. I'm going to jump to neural networks real quickly because I've got a little bit more to say on natural language processing. But neural networks, I mentioned them a minute ago, they're like multi-layered mathematical constructions with lots of nodes, and they're inspired by our brain's neural paths. If you've ever seen a picture of thinking, and there's just it's like a spider web of connections. And so that's kind of what they're inspired. So they truly are designed to engage in deep learning and try to approximate what a human brain might do. Natural language processing is really coming to the forefront, and we'll talk a little bit about this when we get into case studies, but machines use plain spoken language, human language, rather than code to transcribe and translate and generate and summarize speech. And really contemporaneous development here, there's an open AI platform called GPT-3 that is considered the largest and most advanced language model ever created. It has 175 billion different parameters. And Microsoft just announced yesterday that they're going to exclusively license that. So they're going to use that to expand Azure's cognitive services, boost semantic searches in Teams, Microsoft Teams, generate Word document summaries, advanced Xbox in-game dialogue. So there's lots of different applications that Microsoft's going to bring to bear. And of course, Microsoft's competitors are also going to get in on this. Amazon Web Services is working on this, and they each have their own natural language processors, but it is probably something that's closest to market and is already in the market for businesses to use. And we're seeing it being used in the franchise world now. And we'll talk about that in a little bit.
And one thing I just add there, if you look generally at what use cases are most prevalent right now in AI for franchisors and other businesses, it's clearly chatbots. It is the customer service bots that are out there that are getting to sound more and more like a human being and are running on AI. But that's, I think, just the tip of the iceberg. Next slide, Dale. Or...
Yeah, next slide. This slide basically gets into a little bit about two different kinds of machine learning. There's supervised learning, and then there's unsupervised learning. And really the difference between the two of them are the inputs and what the machine does with them. But the idea is to take a set of data and categorize it in a certain way. So the machine is tasked with coming up with either a predictive model or just categorizing information so it can be further developed through additional steps or processes. So that's kind of this story of machine learning. And right now is it's very dependent on not only the data sets, but also the coding that a human has done. So it is not, like I said, at the end of the spectrum where the machine's doing all the work and figuring things out on its own. That's the deep learning part that is the most exciting thing, but it's not really ready for prime time.
The way I think of it, Dale, is supervised learning is like when you go take your driver's license test and they give you the answer book like right next to it, and you know they want you to figure it out and they want you to get the answers right, and you have an answer key right there. That's how supervised learning takes. In other words, it's a repeated process so that the machine learns categories and goes through that. The idea of unsupervised learning means that, and we'll talk a little bit more about it, but it means that the machine is, as Dale said, thinks like a human. It will say, do I use associative relationships here? Do I use other methods of reasoning, basically, to figure out how the relationship is with these parties, these different images? And that's when we talked about computer vision before. That's the imaging process that goes into facial recognition and then taking those images and making correlations and other decisions from them. So where is this stuff coming from, and where do you get it? And these logos represent companies that are deep into artificial intelligence and have both products and operate as consultants, depending on your business needs, to see what kinds of things you want to do. So for example, Applied Geographic Solutions, if you're looking to do a location site, they have huge big data sets that will help you decide based on all the things that you look at in deciding a particular physical location in the neighborhood. All of that data is there, and then all of the industry data and everything else that you can pull into it. Google AutoML is really a suite. It's a place where you can go, and Google's really trying to build a world where you come to them, and that's where you can sort of pick and choose from a menu of the AI solutions that might be right for you. And the rest of these are all, again, dealing with various, they have different specialties in the AI world, but these are sort of the leaders currently in the clubhouse with respect to this. But a lot of companies are taking this artificial intelligence in terms of advancement in-house, but you'll find that those parties that are out here in the competitive world dealing in artificial intelligence keep sharing within the industry different ways to make improvements.
Okay, where's the investment flowing? As you can see from this pie graph, the top country in the world for AI investment is the United States. Other category is second, and then comes China. And as you might imagine, at a political level, the world's two top economies are also its AI superpowers. China has invested billions of dollars to reach technological parity with the United States. In fact, they released a plan about 3 years ago saying that by 2025, they want to be the global leader, be on the way to being the global leader by fully implementing a industrial strategy that enables them to accomplish that in the next 10 years. There's a company called Franchisors that creates training data for lots of AI applications. And they recently reported the hottest areas for their requests for training data for machines in order to feed it into machines and accomplish AI goals. And those topics are augmented reality and virtual reality, biometrics or facial recognition, object recognition for e-commerce purposes, transportation, all the self-driving cars, trains, planes, and so on that we've heard about, delivery, autonomous robots, which is all those, both transportation and delivery require AI concepts that allow the machine to see and observe and understand that that's a sidewalk, or that's a road, or that's a pedestrian, or that's grass and trees and so on. And then the last two are automation and then healthcare. So the investment in these areas is significant, and it continues to grow. And the largest, most valuable companies in the world are those that are highly labor efficient because they don't have many employees, and they're the ones that are continue to double down on the technology front.
And it's a little, the picture we have here is of a smart warehouse. And if you haven't visited one of these, it's a pretty remarkable experience in terms of how these robots, based on programming and using AI to anticipate and know which orders are coming. And not only that, sort of the whole system knowing just-in-time manufacturing and how to get things to the warehouse where they need to be. It's pretty incredible. Some of the other use cases for AI implementation are listed here, and they, I think, mirror some of the things that Dale just said in terms of investment. One thing that I think, again, to come back to an earlier point, is that AI can displace jobs. There's no question about that. If there are people who are doing calculation or certain manipulations of data, it can do it much faster, it can do it much more efficiently. But really what that does is, people need to think about it this way, is that it enhances the opportunities at a higher level for humans to participate in the economy. So if you were doing it's like a calculator. The person who had to do all the math by hand in the old days, once they have a calculator, now the person who did only that doesn't have a job, but that person uses a calculator and moves up to a higher level of function within the organization. So a lot of what franchisors and companies in general have to figure out is, what are those higher functions? If I'm freeing people up, what are the skill sets I need from those people, and how does it build on the AI that I've got? So when you look at your organization, you need to be thinking about where do we need to realize efficiencies, and how are we going to get ROI out of our investment in this technology? And when you do that, if you don't leverage it against the human talent that really helps all businesses be what they want to be, it's the culture and the way that the business actually functions, then you're missing out. But Dale, I don't know if you want to talk about any of these specific use cases in more detail.
Well, we've kind of talked about site location and speech recognition a little bit. earlier. But lead generation is kind of the same thing. You're as you know, just like you're trying to find a site geographically that is got the right attributes that you're looking for. If you're looking for a prospective customer and has certain attributes, then a computer can help you determine that. Advertising and sales is also something that is starting to kind of like the lead generation. You're trying to identify by identifying down to a granular level the person most likely to buy your product, and then you devote your efforts in advertising and sales and your promotional budgets and that sort of thing toward that group of people, as opposed to the old way of you do an advertisement in a newspaper and lots of people see it, but not many of them are buyers. Customer care and service, Tedrick talked a little bit about that earlier with chatbots. A lot of the most websites now have frequently asked questions kinds of things, and those are usually run by chatbots, where they take all the information that a customer may want and they come up with standard answers for it, but over time those get refined. And when you're actually talking to somebody, you're usually not talking to a human. Merchandising and logistics, as you can see from the picture there, this is really taking leaps forward from a standpoint of technology, and AI is a big player in that area. In healthcare, there's actually a number of interesting things in these days of the pandemic that is fascinating. We're using AI to identify and diagnose and treat various different diseases. And I don't know how many of you have your Fitbit on, but I have mine on. These things are pretty rudimentary at this point, but they're getting better all the time, and they're actually employing them now for pets too. So your vet can have a download of your pet's biometrics, and you can do a lot of different things with that data. It all depends on what you're after, but you can imagine that doctors are interested in that. Healthcare professionals are interested in not just getting and I had a doctor tell me this one time. He said, let me check you out and then I'll listen to you. But he didn't want me to tell him what was wrong with me, because he said, that's my job. And the old way was the doctor asked you what was wrong. And how do you know what's wrong? So we're getting these tools now that enable everyone to do their jobs better. That's Tedrick's point a minute ago about job loss. It actually helps people do their jobs better, not completely replace them necessarily. And in the healthcare front, there's just a long list of things that are happening. We actually had a company that here in the Kansas City area that would use data mined from mobile applications to determine where the flu was prevalent, down to the exact building that people seem to have a lot of flu in. And so, for instance, if you're a business that sends out a workforce to work in someone's home or to work on someone's site, and you're able to check that kind of data up front, you might be able to reschedule on a day when it says don't go there because there's a lot of flu there today, and thereby reduce your sick days among your employee base. It's just fascinating that the information that we can identify and the trends that come with this. And Tedrick, I think, mentioned some of the Apple products. Apple Watches, their latest, have built-in blood oxygen monitors. They actually have fall detection technology for elder care. So if you fall, it monitors that and it can communicate that. It's just fascinating what things can do now. And robotic surgery, my father 25 years ago had one of the first robotic surgeries, and we found out later that it didn't go very well. They had to go in and actually fix what the robot tried to do, and it didn't do a good job. Robotic surgery techniques are really getting a lot better now. So all these tools are are really coming to bear to help us all do a better job at what we do and be more efficient.
And I would just add, it reminds me of a couple of brief anecdotes. The other day I was talking with a friend of mine who's a pathologist, and I asked whether, so how does it work? Is it different than the way it used to be? And he said, well, yeah, I mainly look at slides. He usually works with oncologists, but he does do he had some thoughts on the testing we're doing for COVID. And he said, the testing we're doing for COVID is all genetic based. We're doing something differently, just like the way the virus, they're trying to get the vaccines to work through genetics. You're looking for genetic markers when you're doing some of these studies. And if you think about it, if you're looking at lung x-rays, let's say, even something more rudimentary than DNA analysis, if you have a program and a machine and data that can run 10,000 images quickly of related patients, that's basically what he's doing. AI is what he sits on top of in order to do his job as a pathologist now. And the other one going back is my son graduated from college with a business degree a year ago and started working in sales for, I think the company sold out and is no longer operating, I think, but it was called Conversica. And what they sold was AI systems to car dealerships. So his job was to talk to the car dealerships, usually the sales manager, and both on the sales side and the service side, explain all the different data that's amassed and all the different comparisons and ways that it works. But it also worked as the CRM for the dealership. It worked as the receptionist, and the voice recognition, or the voice of the robotic receptionist, was so good that they had sometimes people want to call, in this case it was a female, to like ask her out. And it is something where when the system automatically has someone that can communicate that way with your customers and remind them that they're due for an oil change, or respond to their call and go through the whole decision tree without, in a way that you programmed and the way that you want, in a way that the customer comes away satisfied, it's pretty amazing. There's just a lot of that going on. All right, so for some case studies.
Food service. Yeah, the food service stuff is really exciting. There's so much happening there that I know that not every franchisor is in the food service industry, but a lot of these things that we're seeing food companies do has application in other areas too. I mean, McDonald's is using voice activated drive-throughs and deep frying robots. Sonic is using an AI powered voice assistant and personalized dynamic menu solution. So we'll see how that works. The idea is that the menu will be customized for a specific customer, or maybe for external factors such as the time of day or the weather or seasonality, that sort of thing. Domino's is also using voice recognition application, as are Denny's and Dunkin'. Chick-fil-A is using a customized AI system that provides the company with the means to analyze social media posts for potential food safety issues. So for instance, if they determine that certain keywords and phrases and sentiments from mobile application posts, they can spot whether or not someone became ill because of something they ate at a Chick-fil-A. And that enables them to circle back and improve their process or fix the problem before it gets worse. Chipotle is also using voice ordering and data gathering and automated phone systems and chatbots to bring its products to the forefront. And then there's a picture on this screen of this robot, Miso Robotics. They're rolling out this robot that they called Flippy. It's a burger flipper, and it is touted by the company in its SEC filings. I was a little skeptical about this, but hey, they put it in an SEC filing, so they must feel confident that it's not a misrepresentation. They said that it's touted as increasing profit margins in fast food restaurants by 300%. Now, that's probably by eliminating waste in eliminating hit count, I'm going to guess. But that'll be interesting. I'm not sure it can do anything other than flip burgers. They have to get a different name for a different one to do something different. Okay, next slide.
Yeah. So we talked about healthcare and case studies, and probably the place where AI, or one of the places where AI is making a huge impact, is in home healthcare. We know that home healthcare is a hot area. It's also an area that's ripe for franchising. This isn't intended to be an ad, but what I did was I looked for a website where someone was promoting their use of technology and what looked like AI to me in terms of just putting themselves out there to franchisees and trying to explain to franchisees what it is they're doing. So Bright Star Care is a large home healthcare franchisee, and they have their CTO quoted here, but if you look at what he says, they parse through the massive amounts of data generated by franchisee operations and spot key performance indicators, trends, and opportunities. He says they're just starting. That is basically what we've been talking about with respect to using the data from AI. If you look at, I was on the board for 10 years of a continuing care retirement community. And so I would go to the Leading Edge conference. That's the one for the nonprofit communities. But every year, the technology was more sophisticated. Dale alluded to it before. If someone has fallen, do they have an issue? It's no longer that I've fallen and I can't get up, push the button, although that's still advertised on TV. The amount of technology that can determine all kinds of things and the monitoring that goes with the things that we wear in terms of wearables makes it almost like you're in the hospital being monitored at all times. And so that's, to me, interesting. And that's also the thing that you see here is the use of a mobile device. So if you look at payroll and you look at, are you going to get a Fair Labor Standards Act claim because people are working off the clock? If they are using a mobile device and you're able to monitor their activity, or for example, if they have to go and get something for the patient and drive to a Walgreens, you have a way of monitoring and tracking all that time so that you can avoid the kinds of large class actions that lock companies face. With respect to the financial world, I didn't know if you knew that Goldman Sachs has started a mobile bank, and it's called Marcus. And they looked at the market and decided and did some research and decided that, look, we don't need to build all of the brick and mortar structure in order to look like a safe place to put your money and work with customers. And so in looking at the customer and doing sort of AI studies on all the different consumer interactions, they determined that the most important part of what people were saying in terms of being bank customers was, we don't understand how loans work. We also don't understand why you don't respect the savings money that we put with you. And they came to other sort of smaller conclusions about what it is customers need. And they tailored this entire enterprise to address those pain points that customers are feeling in their banking relationships. Now, that's not that new. There are ads for mobile banks that already exist, and the existing brick and mortar banks have all gone to systems where you scan a check to put it in. It's pretty much an online experience for a large majority of banking consumers. But it is changing, and it's changing more and more. I think that the rollout of Apple Card really showed how synergies in terms of different customer relationships can be brought together. We know this from Amazon because how many people are just buying everything from Amazon and trying to figure out how to get rid of all those cardboard boxes, or teaching their family to break them down before they throw them in the recycling bin. But again, that's just a small irritation on my part. But if you look at the Apple Card, it's really a whole new revenue stream for Apple and puts them right in the middle of basically the credit card and banking industry, just by virtue of the reputation that they gained from other parts of the business. UBS has a full-blown AI group, and I think they have more than 50 different devoted teams to different AI projects, and it runs the gamut across the businesses. And one thing they were looking at was looking at anomalies in their computer system, and the CTO, the Chief Technical Officer, said, we think that the AI system that we built in-house for this and monitors that and gives us the kinds of warnings we need for anomalies in our system replaces about 10,000 people. So if you think about what do you do and how do you take this information and make it work for your business, you think about your own pain points, just like Marcus was thinking about the pain points for its customers. The source here, I'll just point out, it came out just a few days ago. It's an article in the Harvard Business Review, and it says, the title of it I thought was good, as well as the content, AI should change what you do, not just how you do it. So again, if you only use AI to make your widget a bit better, you may be missing the point that the widget isn't the thing that's coming next that you need to be working on. So that's part of the agility that we need as we start to work more and more with AI in our businesses.
And Tedrick, this is Ryan. I'll pop in for just a moment. One of the attendees asked a practical question, and this might be a good time to address it. I'll just read part of it here. It says, for many franchisors who are not part of large networks, maybe have 50 or 100 franchisees, what do you recommend for them getting their arms around AI? And I think particularly if they don't have the human capital or the in-house resources to tackle everything that we're talking about. Do you have any ideas there for either you or Dale?
Yeah, I was just actually starting to answer that question in the chat box. I think that's a great idea to reach out to the vendors. The vendors, of course, are the best at selling what they do. And the big tech companies that we mentioned earlier, Microsoft and Amazon Web Services and so on, are way ahead of the game on a lot of this. And they've developed products that are licensable by businesses of all sizes to examine particular sets of data, depending on what you request, to come up with various insights that might be relevant to you. And Tedrick mentioned some other companies about where you get this, where do you get AI from? Because not everybody has the capability or the resources to develop that on their own. And frankly, you shouldn't. I mean, it costs a lot of money to develop this stuff. If somebody else is going to do it, eat that upfront R&D expense and then license it out, recoup their money from thousands of customers, you don't want to pay for all of it. So I think that's a great idea.
Yeah, I agree with Dale. And it's kind of like choosing the time to dip your toe in the technology. It's like with my iPhone. I think I'm an iPhone 7 still. So in some ways it's monolithic, but I don't want to jump until I'm going to get a massive improvement. It's kind of like if I'm Dale's dad, I don't want to be robot surgery 1.0. I want to be robot surgery 30.6, right? And I think if you go to the Google site that we talked about, that is a suite, I think that you'll find at least some stuff, probably through AI, telling you the kinds of things that you'd be interested in. But go there, Microsoft, some of those other places. The other thing to do is just look in the marketplace and look at your competitors and look at the trade magazines, because most of the trade organizations or the industry organizations that exist have to have their finger on AI. It's, for example, the American Association of Accountants. If you go to a conference that they have, it's going to talk a lot about AI and what it's going to replace and how it's going to improve the business model. So I think that's a good suggestion, and I do think that you'll want something at a smaller level or off the shelf that fits a problem rather than something you need a customized solution to that's going to require a lot of maintenance, upkeep, and probably some problems to work out as you go.
Okay, we're going to jump into some practical pitfalls and then some legal pitfalls or things you should think about. I'm going to cover these fairly quickly so we're running a little bit short on time now, but The first is cost. Of course, franchisors often in franchise agreements push the cost of IT and software related advancements off on the franchisees, which is fine. That's kind of like the big company spreading the cost among a bunch of people. That makes sense. But think about that, because you want to have a uniform standard across your system. And if you acquire an AI product and roll it out to your franchisees, there's, like any other software product, there's going to be not only the efficacy of what it accomplishes, but also the training that's related and licensing issues and stuff like that. Errors, mistakes. AI is still, even though it's been around for 70 years, it's still a relatively new and quickly developing technology. And like any other technology, there are bugs to be resolved. It's kind of like if your phone doesn't work, you turn it off and turn it back on, and then it starts working better. So keep that in mind. Also, that's something that, the risk of that kind of thing, you should make sure it's covered in your franchise agreement, that franchisees don't have recourse against you if there's a problem with that software. Bias is a big issue. Bias, I'm gonna give an example to show what the problem with bias is. Amazon built a resume evaluation AI tool using data from 10 years of resumes that Amazon had received, which no one thought about, but they'd actually been mostly received from men. And so the resulting AI tool downgraded female applicants because they weren't men, and it took a while for them to realize this was happening. So kind of the garbage in, garbage out thing. AI is based on algorithms that reflect their human origins. And so AI inputs, training data sets, and the outcomes, the insights may reflect those biases, both unknown and known. Most of the AI community of developers in the United States tends to skew white and male. So that affects how AI is built. So it's difficult for a consumer of AI products to fix that. You just need to be aware of it. And it's kind of the old thing, take outputs with a grain of salt and be aware of it. Misunderstandings. Don't buy what you don't understand. So if you don't fully understand the product, get some help. There are lots of consultants out there that will help evaluate software products. Companies, as you might imagine, have exaggerated degree of automation and the effectiveness of their software. There was actually a survey done in the European Union in 2019 that found that 40% of European AI startups didn't actually use AI. So just because somebody says they've got an AI product doesn't mean that it's just not a souped up software product that doesn't really use AI. So do your homework so you don't fall into that kind of trap and buy something that, like a lot of software systems or software licenses, you're stuck with for a while, that is not really going to accomplish what you need it to do. The last that we threw in here was hacking. Much of AI software is open source. And as Tedrick mentioned earlier, when we were talking about deepfakes, AI is being used to fake out other AI. Biases can be exploited to allow malware to be installed. Sometimes if you're not careful, and I say you, if you're an AI product developer, if they're not careful, people get into their training data sets and damage or corrupt that training data so that the AI works perfectly, but it spits out corrupt results as a result, and they're not easily noticeable. They're kind of like intentional biases, but they're not easy to see. There's also voice spoofing. You've probably heard of voice spoofing, where somebody calls and it sounds like it is the CFO, and he says, wire this money to this account, and it turns out it wasn't the CFO. That happened recently. It was in the news. A bunch of money was transferred, and it wasn't even the CFO that requested that the money be transferred, but it was a voice spoof. So there could also be kind of sleeper cells. We've heard that's the stuff of modern terrorism movies, where we have sleeper cells, but malware can reside in any software code and then be triggered upon something, whether it's a particular person's voice or some other kind of trigger. And so those kind of problems, they're very difficult for you to identify, and also very difficult for you to do anything about. That's why you need to vet the product that you're going to buy from reputable parties. And there's also a little bit of a growth in the market for AI related insurance products. So you might explore that too, so that if you do have one of these problems, you have a little bit of a remedy.
Well, one thing I mentioned on bias is you'll hear a lot about, a lot of courts are using criminal sentencing AI systems in order to make things fair, right? Let the machine do the calculations. And one example of sort of input bias would be in calculating the recidivism sort of prediction factor. If individuals are from a low-income neighborhood, the algorithm was giving that undue weight, kind of like the male Amazon resumes, and that resulted in issues. A couple of other things that just come to mind, and maybe in these slides, but I'll mention briefly. A lot of this requires to be done, you have to do it in a way that people will adopt it. So contact tracing, for example, the Apple-Google collaboration, France had decided on a contact tracing app that everyone in the country was going to use. And within the first 3 months, I think they had like 60 people who had adopted it. So if you don't plan on that, you're going to have a problem. And then the last thing in terms of misunderstandings, I think I read correctly that in about 5 years, a lot of us will be having our own AI assistants doing a lot of our communications with businesses. So if you want to order your groceries or get a haircut or do some other kind of transaction, your AI assistant will do it for you. You'll tell your phone, and your phone will later do it for you. So AI assistants are going to be talking to other AI assistants, and sort of a glimpse of the future of what we might be looking at. So legal pitfalls of artificial intelligence, I think we've covered quite a bit of this, but data ownership is key because that's what AI acts upon. And so if you don't have rights to the data, you have a real problem. A lot of what I do, combining that with privacy, is look at the data that companies are looking to use and monetize, and oftentimes share with another company or share with a partner in order to figure out a way to do business better. And the data subjects' rights depend upon the law. So in Europe, as you know, and probably under the General Data Protection Regulation, there are strict limits on your ability to use that kind of data and the ways that you can use it. In the US, we have the California Consumer Privacy Act that puts limits on your ability to share data. And if you don't know that, right now, if you fall under the statute, which many companies do, if you share that data with someone who's not a service provider, then you have to have a big button on your website on the homepage that says, do not sell my personal information, or at least have it available. And so all of these legal restrictions, either statutory or contractual, all play into what you're going to allow artificial intelligence to do with respect to the data. And Dale, I don't know if you want to talk about.
Yeah, I just, given time, I'm going to make just one comment on the legal pitfalls. We talked about data ownership between the franchisor and the franchisee. You also need to make sure that who owns the data between you and the party you buy the AI tool from, because you may find out that they own the data and you don't, and there's limitations on how you can use it, or if you stop using their product, you lose the right to use the data that you actually provided to them, or came about because of your relationship. So keep that in mind.
And these last couple of slides, I'm just going to breeze through because these are just a couple of surveys about what's going on with AI and what are the obstacles. And company culture is the top of that one. The risks that people see, and this says what they think they're prepared for on the left and what they are concerned about on the right. The top here, concern was cybersecurity vulnerabilities. And then second was AI failures affecting business operations, all rational, reasonable things to be fearful of. And of course, everyone's got a gap there between what the problem is and what their ability to handle it is. So we're done, okay, I think, Ryan, but go ahead,
yeah.
Dale.
Yeah, there's a lot lot to cram into an hour. You guys did a great job. We really appreciate you breaking it all down for us. We talk to our franchisor clients and know that this is something they're living with every day, and it's complicated and fascinating at the same time. So thanks again to both of you, and thanks to all of you for joining us. We really do appreciate it. If you have a question after we wrap up here, we hope you'll get in touch. Also, if you have a topic you'd like to see us address in a future franchisor focused webinar, be sure to let us know that as well. We have a great team of people who produce these events, and we are always looking for good ideas. And with that, we will say goodbye for now. So from Tedrick, Dale, and all of us here at Lathrop GPM, thanks very much for being with us. Have a great day, stay safe and healthy, and we'll hope to see you back here real soon. Take care.